start off with the fatal crash. That was Friday night, right around 11:30 p.m. At the intersection of 26th and Minnesota. So I'll preface this by saying we're by no means even close to being done with this investigation. There's still a lot of work to do, but some of the early indications, speed was definitely a factor. We had two vehicles that were going north on Minnesota Avenue. One of them was a 2007 Volkswagen GTI, and the other was a 2003 BMW 530i. We had some witnesses that were behind those two cars, and based off of those witness statements, the witnesses thought that it appeared that they were racing. At the very least, both of them were traveling at a high rate of speed. And we don't have any indication on what that speed was other than it was just a high rate of speed. As they approached the intersection at 26th Street, there was a third vehicle that was a 2016 Ford Escape. That vehicle, that Escape, was going west. So that time of night, the intersection, it's flashing yellow for Minnesota and flashing red for 26th Street. The Escape stopped at the flashing red. The driver looked, didn't see any cars, and started to drive through the intersection. As she was driving through the intersection, both the Volkswagen and the BMW struck her vehicle. The Volkswagen veered off towards the west and ended up hitting a pole. The driver ended up dying from those injuries, was pronounced dead on scene. The BMW went to the east and struck the front of a building. There were two people in the Volkswagen, the driver that died, and there was a passenger that was taken to the hospital. The driver of the BMW is taken to the hospital. I don't have an update on any of their conditions. The driver of the Escape was treated and released, had some minor cuts and possible bruising, but she went to the hospital, was checked out, and was released that same night.
She was the lone person in that vehicle?
In the Escape, she was the only person in that vehicle.
Was gender on the rider with the deceased?
A woman.
A woman?
Yep.
Young
And
woman,
everybody was 20.
Okay.
That makes it a little bit easier. But so he had a man and a woman in the Volkswagen. I'll give you the name of the driver that died. His last name is Fountain, F-O-U-N-T-A-I-N. First is Jaren, J-A-R-E-N. Middle is James, J-A-M-E-S. He's 20. The driver of the, he's 20 from Sioux Falls. The driver of the BMW, he's 20 from Sioux Falls. The driver of the Escape is a 20-year-old woman. She is from Madison, South Dakota. And the passenger, she also is 20 from Sioux Falls, the passenger of the Volkswagen. Let's see, we're still looking into whether any alcohol was a factor. It sounds like the driver of the BMW may have had some alcohol in his system, but we're still waiting further tests on that, and we don't have any indication yet. We're still waiting tests on the driver of the Volkswagen. So it's one of those things that's a standard, always check for whether drugs or alcohol are on board, and of course, anytime we have a big accident like this, speed seems to be an early indication. I don't think there's any doubt in that, especially given the witness statements. There was a pretty large debris field from this crash. That area was closed for about 6 hours, from 11 p.m. to 5 a.m. And once the traffic investigators were done, they had to call in a street sweeper because there was so much debris everywhere to clean the roadway. The driver of the Escape, there was no indication of any alcohol use there.
You know about seatbelts?
Let's see. The Escape was wearing a seatbelt. Escape driver was wearing a seatbelt. The driver of the Volkswagen, seatbelt was used. The passenger, the seatbelt was used. The driver of the BMW. Seatbelt was used. And I think that's it, right? Yeah, it looks like everybody
Everyone had a seatbelt.
everybody had their seatbelts on. Yep.
A bit of good news on all this. I'm not assuming it's racing, but in general, is racing an issue on Sioux Falls streets late at night or on big boulevards or freeways like that?
Yeah, I think most of the problem we have with racing and speed comes from the areas on the outside or the edges of Sioux Falls. I know we have a lot of complaints on those roads. Through town like that, on like Minnesota or even 41st Street, I don't know that we necessarily see a lot of those complaints. There may be some of that happens that's, I guess I'll call it localized to, in little different areas, but I don't know that we have a lot of, I don't hear of a lot of problems of racing reported there, but I guess I can't tell you how much or how frequent or infrequent it happens.
Is there a racing citation or is it just speed?
There is an ordinance in Sioux Falls against racing. So, and it's actually two vehicles racing or a simulated race. And so a lot of times what happens is an officer may stop a car and it appears that they're racing and they said, no, I wasn't racing. But if it appears that there's two vehicles that are racing, that statute or that ordinance covers that. So it's prohibited in Sioux Falls. And that is an ordinance violation, which would be a ticket.
Any idea, I know it's hard for you to say, but fortunate that it could have been worse, right? We're talking about three vehicles
Right.
going at a high rate of speed, looks like they had seatbelts on and maybe not alcohol. We could be talking about 3 or 4 fatalities this morning.
I mean, yeah, just given the speeds, what the witnesses thought that they're traveling at, and you have a vehicle that pulls out in front of two cars going that fast, it's certainly possible there could have been other injuries. I guess we'll have to wait till the full reconstruction is complete, and that will have some minimum speeds, at least as far as the estimate, and that there's a lot of math and physics involved with that. But, I think it could have been worse. I think we're fortunate. It's a horrible situation, and it's horrible that somebody lost their life, but it certainly could have been, a lot of other people could have been killed or even hurt more seriously than what they were.
This was on Valentine's night. Right?
Yep,
Yeah.
yep.
And you said you don't know the conditions of the two that went to the
No,
hospital?
we haven't had updates yet. I think initially they were taken there for non-life-threatening injuries, but that's pretty, a vague term. And we haven't heard an update on conditions.
Could citations, I guess, for anyone involved, could that still be coming down the pike?
Yeah, we'll have to wait to see how the investigation unfolds. And any time, I guess I'll leave it at that. It's a little too early to try to say if there would be any citations or charges. Once that investigation's complete, then they're going to have a whole idea of exactly what took place. Like I said, part of that is looking at the different vehicles, the damage to those, and then positioning of some of the debris and where the cars ended up. And it's actually quite fascinating how they're able to determine minimum speeds from that. But once they have that determined, then they're usually by that time they're going to have the results from the blood and alcohol tests. So when they have those toxicology tests, then they'll be able to find out if alcohol or drugs were a factor or if it was just speed or obviously any combination of those. Once all of that stuff is done, it'll be up to the investigators will send that to the state's attorney's office and the city attorney's office to review, and then they will determine if there's any appropriate charges and what those charges would be. So it's even too early to speculate if there's any type of charges, what those would be at this point.
Any way you could give us maybe an estimated average timeline for how long it takes for those processes to be complete?
No, because they're all a little bit different. Each one of those crashes, there's there's a lot of different pieces that involved with that, and when you have more vehicles, then it complicates things. And so I know that the sergeant that I spoke to this morning said that they knew that both of those vehicles that were traveling on Minnesota had struck the other one because there was paint transfer from those. So now, if it was just one car that hit another car, it's a little bit easier as far as trying to figure out those formulas and distance and, you know, impact and force and all of those, everything that goes into that. But when you have two of them, it's going to complicate things a little bit more, make it a little bit more difficult. But it, you know, toxicology, that's, you know, that could take 6 to 8 weeks to come back. When you're looking at all the different pieces from a complicated accident, I can't tell you a rough time frame.
I think the people that were the witnesses, which thank goodness they were there, they hadn't called into 911 about racing.
I don't know. I didn't see anything. I didn't do any checking to see if anybody had called, but
it could have been a brief race, and they're like, oh yeah, they were
right.
speeding.
My guess is that it probably happened so fast there probably wasn't time to call to report any racing.